Good evening, I'm Jeremy Rosen. I'm Associate Director for Faculty here at the Tanner Humanities Center. I'm also an Associate Professor of English. It's my really great pleasure to welcome you to this evening's event with Carmen Maria Machado. Under this calm exterior, I'm kind of fanning out here too a little bit. But I want to begin by acknowledging that the land we gather on today, which is named for the Ute tribe, is the traditional and ancestral homeland of the Shoshone, Paiute, Goshute, and Ute tribes. The University of Utah recognizes and respects the enduring relationship that exists between many indigenous peoples and their traditional homelands. We respect and affirm the sovereign relationship between tribes, states, and the federal government, and we affirm the university's commitment to a partnership with Native nations and urban Indian communities through research, education, and community outreach activities. The Tanner Humanities Center aims to advance humanities exploration and engagement through academic research, educational enrichment, and public outreach. We are grateful to O.C. Tanner for their generous and multi-generational commitment to the center and its work. And for helping to support this event, I also want to thank the B.W. Bastian Foundation, the R. Harold Burton Foundation, the College of Humanities, Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, the King's English Bookshop, PEN America, the Salt Lake City Arts Council, the Salt Lake County Zoo Arts and Parks Program, Under the Umbrella Bookstore, who is hosting a book signing after the events. Please buy books. Please support our local booksellers. Utah Humanities, who is having their book festival going on right now. Please support their events. Utah Humanities is an organization that enriches our cultural, intellectual, and civic life by providing opportunities for all Utahns to explore life's most engaging questions and the wonders of the human experience. And the Tanner Humanities Center staff, who do so much work behind the scenes to make these events possible: Beth James, Susan Anderson, Missy Weeks, and Skylar Fetter. In honor of our distinguished guest, and of course pumpkin spice season, I thought about trying to write an author introduction as dark fairy tale. But I realized I ought to probably leave this kind of thing to the expert, and I'm also just too happy for a dark fairy tale about this occasion. I like to tell my students, and really anyone who will listen, that I have the greatest job in the world. I get to read books and talk about them, write about them, teach them to mostly interested students. And they pay me for this. Not well, but they pay me. And luckier still, in my role at the Tanner Humanities Center, I get to meet and talk with authors whose work I deeply admire. Today is an especially lucky day. I've been working on a book about innovative uses of genre in contemporary fiction. My book does what scholarly books are supposed to do. It fills a gap in the existing scholarship. But lucky me, it's also a passion project, because the books I like to read are books that take an existing genre and transform it in unpredictable ways, bend it toward new subject matter, blend it with other genres in unexpected combinations. It's hard to think of a writer working today who better exemplifies this genre-bending aesthetic than Carmen Maria Machado. She holds an MFA from the Iowa Writers Workshop and has been awarded fellowships and residencies from the Guggenheim Foundation, Yaddo, Hedgebrook, and the Malay Colony for the Arts. She is the author of the best-selling memoir, In the Dream House, the graphic novel, The Low, Low Woods, and the award-winning short story collection, Her Body and Other Parties. If you haven't read Her Body and Other Parties, go buy it. She has been the finalist for the National Book Award and the winner of the Bard Fiction Prize, the Lambda Literary Award for Lesbian Fiction, the Lambda Literary Award for LGBTQ Nonfiction, and lots of other awards that I'm not going to list right now. Her essays in fiction and criticism have appeared in The New Yorker, The New York Times, Granta, Vogue, and lots of other venues. And she lives currently where she's teaching in Iowa City, and she's the former Abrams Artist in Residence at the University of Pennsylvania. Please join me in welcoming Carmen Maria Machado.
Hi, everybody. I'm so glad. Woo! I'm so glad to be here. It's so good to see all your faces. Well, those of you I can see. I can't see everybody in the back, but I can see a lot of you. Hi. So I am going to be reading from my memoir, In the Dream House, and then we're going to be having a conversation. So, if you haven't read Dream House, just to give you a little bit of information about it, it's a memoir about queer domestic violence. Every chapter is told it's sort of told in these like small fragmented chapters, and the title of every chapter is Dream House as something, and this something is like an organizing, often genre focused or story focused sort of organizing element. So I'm just going to read 3 chapters for you guys. Dream House as Bluebeard. Bluebeard's greatest lie was that there was only one rule. The newest wife could do anything she wanted, anything, as long as she didn't do that single arbitrary thing, didn't stick that tiny inconsequential key into that tiny inconsequential lock. But we all know that was just the beginning, a test. She failed and lived to tell the tale, as I have. But even if she'd passed, even if she'd listened, there would have been some other request, a little larger, a little stranger. And if she'd kept going, kept allowing herself to be trained like a corset fanatic pinching her waist smaller and smaller, there'd have been a scene where Bluebeard danced around with the rotting corpses of his past wives clasped in his arms, and the newest wife would have sat there mutely, suppressing growing horror, swallowing the egg of vomit that bobbed behind her breastbone. And then later, another scene in which he did unspeakable things to the bodies. Women, they'd once been women. And she just stared dead into the middle distance, seeking some purgatory where she could live forever. Some scholars believe that Bluebeard's Bluebeard is a symbol of his supernatural nature, easier to accept than being brought to heel by a simple man. But isn't that the joke? He can be simple, and she doesn't have to be a man. Because she hadn't blinked at the key and its conditions, hadn't paused when he told her her footfalls were too heavy for his liking, hadn't protested when he fucked her while she wept, hadn't declined when he suggested she stop speaking, hadn't said a word when he left bruises on her arms, hadn't scolded him for speaking to her like she was a dog or a child, hadn't run screaming down the path from the castle into the nearest village, pleading with someone to help, help, help. It made logical sense that she sat there and watched him spinning around the body of wife number 4, its decaying head flopping backward on a hinge of flesh. This is how you are toughened, the newest wife reasoned. This is where the tenacity of love is practiced, its tensile strength, its durability. You are being tested, and you are passing the test. Sweet girl, sweet self, look how good you are. Look how loyal. Look how loved. This chapter is called Dream House as Mystical Pregnancy. Every television show you watched in your 20s included some kind of mystical pregnancy. Every interesting female character needs one, or so the showrunners seem to think. Vampires get pregnant with magical mortals. Comatose women give birth to gods, and empathic Starfleet officers to mystic energy. Time-traveling companions discover they've been flesh avatars for months, and their actual body is somewhere far away and about to give birth. One woman wakes up on her wedding day to discover herself massively pregnant, courtesy of an alien. You are thinking of these episodes when you begin to experience pregnancy symptoms in the dream house. You vomit into a toilet. You feel swollen and out of sorts. The two of you have talked about a child for so long, a little girl, Clementine, hair poofy like a Q-tip, like hers, that you abandon all reason and wonder if you could be pregnant. You have had so much sex, and the intensity between you feels as real as anything. You consider saying to her, "Ha, I'm sick like I'm pregnant. Isn't that weird?" But you are terrified. of the radical body modification that is pregnancy, the dangers of childbirth, the unforgiving nature of motherhood, and, most importantly, what she'll accuse you of, what she'll do afterward. You drink ginger ale, you lie down for a long time, you forego food for an evening under the pretense of having snacked, which you definitely did not do. You cannot be pregnant, you cannot be pregnant, you literally absolutely could not be pregnant under any circumstances. And here there's a footnote. Thompson, Motif Index of Folk Literature, Type 511 1.3, Conception from Eating Mango. T511 1.5, Conception from Eating Lemon. T511 2.1, Conception from Eating Mandrake. T511 2.2, Conception from Eating Watercress. T511 3.1, Conception from Eating Peppercorn. T511 3.2, Conception from Eating Spinach. T511 4.1, Conception from Eating Rose. T511 5.2, Conception from swallowing a worm in a drink of water. T511 5.3, Conception from Eating louse. T511 6.1, Conception from Eating a woman's heart. T511 6.2, Conception from Eating finger bones. T511 7.1, Conception after eating honey given by a lover. T511 8.6, Conception from swallowing a pearl. T512.4, Conception from drinking a saint's tears. T512.7, Conception from drinking dew. T513.3.1, Conception through another's wish. T514, Conception after reciprocal desire for each other. T515.1, Impregnation through lustful glance. T516, Conception through a dream. T517, Conception from extraordinary intercourse. T521, Conception from sunlight. T521.1, Conception from moonlight. T521.2, Conception from rainbow. T522, Conception from falling rain. T523, Conception from bathing. T524, Conception from wind. T525, Conception from falling star. T525.2, Impregnation by comet. T528, Impregnation by thunder or lightning. T532.1.3, Impregnation by leaf of lettuce. T532.1.4, Conception from the smell of a cooked dragon's heart. T532.1.4.1, Conception after smelling ground bone dust. T532.2, Conception from stepping on an animal. T532.3, Conception from fruit thrown against the breast. T532.5, Conception from putting on another's girdle. T532.1, Conception from the hiss of a cobra. T533, Conception from spittle. T534, Conception from blood. T535, Conception from fire. T536, Conception from feathers falling on a woman. T539.2, Conception by a cry. You take a pregnancy test like an idiot. And of course it's negative because you haven't had a penis anywhere near your body in years. You are afraid she'll find the test, so you put it in a Ziploc bag and throw it out in someone's trash can on the street after she's gone to class. And the last one I'm reading is Dream House as a Natural Disaster. I get bad heartburn. Actually, not anymore. Thank you. I get bad heartburn. It's the Zoloft, which takes the edge off my anxiety, but brings along a bunch of awful side effects, like a good friend who can't shed a bad lover. Every so often, I take my nightly meds, and within a few minutes, feel as though a hot poker has been shoved down my esophagus. I chew antacids and walk to the bathroom. Often the pain or the force of the neutralization makes me vomit. I become, functionally, everyone's favorite science fair project. When I bend over the toilet, I think a lot about how my heart is a volcano, like that quote from Khalil Gibran. It's dumb, but it moved me, and I wrote it down on a Post-it note that I stuck on my desk. If your heart is a volcano, how can you expect flowers to bloom in your hands? It stayed there until a bad day, working on this book, when I suddenly loathed the quote with every fiber of my being and crumpled it up and threw it away. Reader, do you remember that ridiculous movie Volcano? The one with Tommy Lee Jones. Have you guys seen this movie? Okay. Classic disaster movie. Terrible. Amazing. Do you remember how they stopped the eruption in the middle of downtown Los Angeles? They diverted it with cement roadblocks and pointed fire hoses at it and rerouted the lava into the ocean and everything was fine. Sweet reader, that is not how lava works. Anyone can tell you that. Here is the truth. I keep waiting for my anger to go dormant, but it won't. I keep waiting for someone to reroute my anger into the ocean, but no one can. My heart is closer to Dante's Peak of Dante's Peak. My anger dissolves grandmas in acid lakes and raises quaint Pacific Northwest towns with ash and asphyxiates jet engines with its grit. Lava keeps leaking down my slopes. You should have listened to the scientists. You should have evacuated earlier. So, Khalil Gibran, I know what he's saying, but even rhetorically, he's making exactly the wrong point. The fact is, people settle near volcanoes because the resulting soil is extraordinary, dense with nutrients from the ash. In this dangerous place, their fruit is sweeter, their crops taller, their flowers more radiant, their yield more bountiful. The truth is, there's no better place to live than in the shadow of a beautiful, furious mountain. Thank you. Yes, there we go. Nope, gotta push that up.
Great, you're a good help. Thanks. Thank you. And a great reader. So I brought all these questions to ask you, and we invited you here for Banned Books Week. So I promise we will get to that issue that I know is close to your heart, but also infuriates you. But I'm going to throw out all these questions for a second because you read this really long set of footnotes. And I want to talk to you about the form of In the Dream House, which is so fascinating. I have to confess, when I read that, I thought that the motif of folk, the index of folk motifs, folktale motifs, was something that you actually made up. And then I looked it up and it's real, the Thompson Index. But are all those motifs real?
Yeah, they're all real. There actually are a bunch more. Like that list is actually like many, many pages long, and I had to cut it down for just practical reasons. So I just found my favorites and I got rid of the others that I didn't like as much. So.
That's incredible. Bad scholar here. I should have looked this up, but I have you here. I have you here now. Okay, I did want to ask you about the form of In the Dream House, which for those of you who haven't read it yet, it has these many chapters, all with titles: Dream House as noir, Dream House as comedy of errors, Dream House as stoner movie. And it also, like, really interestingly uses the second person. You sort of are talking about yourself, but with you. It also uses the present tense, which is kind of abnormal in memoir and in most fiction narrates in the past. So I wonder, that's maybe a lot of things to talk about, but maybe just to start with the kind of titles. I mean, what drew you to that form for the book, to think of this topic, which is, of course, a really, upsetting and intimate and personal topic for you. It's a really important topic, I think, to draw people's attention to intimate partner violence. But it uses all these different frameworks, these kind of different micro-genres or motifs or metaphors for this situation.
Yeah, well, I sort of went through this phase where I knew I wanted to write something about this moment of my life. When I first began thinking about it, it was honestly like the biggest thing sort of looming in my sky. It was just like this, and I'd gotten out of the relationship and I had sort of, moved on in certain ways, but also it was just this thing that really felt like it was sort of infecting me, and I didn't really know what to do about it. And I had written sort of fiction that dealt with it sort of in some ways more directly, some ways more obliquely, but I knew that I wanted to try to tackle it with nonfiction. And so I began to write pages, and I had this terrible problem where the pages were dreadful, like they were unreadable. I mean, I would read them back to myself and I'd be like, this is awful, no one's gonna wanna read this. It just felt dead on the page. So it was clear that I hadn't found the right shape, or there was something that was missing. And so I quite literally I had like a eureka moment where I was at this, there's this wonderful program at the University of Iowa that teaches, it's like nerd summer camp for like high school writers, which I would have killed to have gone to as a kid, but I did not, but I get to teach there. And so, because I was teaching this kind of compressed class, and it was like, 2 weeks, and every day we were talking about, and I usually organize my classes around genre as like a way of entering into conversations about craft. So we were just talking about genre every single day, and I was literally walking, like, I think away from class, like, one afternoon, and I was like, oh, I feel like this material has like sort of a gothic or like a horror haunted sort of sensibility. What if I try to think about it through that lens? And then I sort of kept walking and was like, oh, what if I just did a bunch of genres? Because it wouldn't just be horror, also it would be like, generationship and high fantasy. And I was thinking about all these ways that different genres sort of inform my way of thinking about storytelling. And by the time I left that trip, I had kind of roughly outlined, not necessarily the book itself, because it took many years to actually finish it, but I sort of had a sense of like what I wanted to do. And the minute I started writing these sections in these sort of almost like poems or these like tight sort of contained pieces, it felt like it came alive. Like I could literally feel it coming off the page, which is a kind of a hard thing to describe, like what that means, but like it when you feel it. You're like, oh, wait, it's fiery, it's doing the thing. And then in terms of the second person, that was, I sold like a very rough sort of version of that material to Grey Wolf, who had published my first book. It was actually before my first book came out. So like they kind of asked me if I had anything else. And I was like, actually, I have this like kind of skeletal version of this memoir, but it's like kind of weird. And I want to do like essay parts, but I don't have any of those written or any of the research done, just like sort of the personal material. And they bought it. And my editor, Ethan, who's wonderful, said, so I noticed everything's in second person. And I was like, is it? And he was like, yes. And then he's like, it's unusual to have a memoir in second person. I am not going to stop you. However, I want to make sure that you are doing it intentionally and not because you're so traumatized you're holding the material like this. And I was like, great note. Let me think about it. And so I thought about it, and I was like, I'll just put it in first person, who cares, whatever. And then I began trying to revert these sections, and then it still didn't seem right. Like it wasn't, then I would read it out loud to myself, which I do a lot. It just didn't, like lost a lot of the energy that it had. And then ultimately I was thinking about this novel, We the Animals by Justin Torres, which if any of you have not read that novel, you must. It's gorgeous. Actually, he's a brand new novel out, which I'm very excited to read. But it's this novel that's told in a plural first voice, so a we voice, about these three brothers. And there's this thing that happens in the novel that sort of ruptures. It's so traumatic that it kind of ruptures the story down to the marrow, breaks the POV, and this one brother like peels off, and it goes from like we to like, I think to like he to you to I, and then eventually it ends with him being alone in the first person. And it's this really devastating sort of gesture. And so I also began thinking about like, oh, I could sort of like actually have something similar where like there's this rupture, and so you have like the I, which is the, the version that's sort of like writing the book and is also like, the me, and the I is like me. It's the me that's sitting here in front of you, but then there's a second person, you, this Carmen, and I can see her, but she can't see me, and she's on like this eternal hamster wheel of pain forever, and I can like look at her and like write towards her, but I can't like access her. And then I did it, and I was like, am I gonna be able to do this? Like, but then I did. So, and then it was done.
That's an amazing way to think about the kind of self-alienation that having that experience and looking back on it like produces or generates. I was wondering also if you want to talk more about like your attraction to haunted house stories or gothics as a framework for that. I mean, I know this is a genre you love to read, but it seems you're also really drawn to writing in that form. Like, does the idea of haunting like open up some affordances for you?
I mean, I think that I'm just really interested, like so many of us are, in the way that the past aggressively asserts itself against the present, and the way that everything, I mean, even you did a land acknowledgement at the beginning of this talk, and that's also like a kind of a haunting, right? It's like a space, it's like the way in which past, present, and future are all kind of colliding with each other in this really intense way. And like, I mean, in everything we do is like this intersection of like time. And so I think that like for me, there's just something about, the way that like the past exists and we have to grapple with it and it tries to kill us, but we have survived it, but it might try to kill us again. And yeah, and I don't know. And I also, this, you know, the Gothic is so interesting because the Gothic is, you know, the genre of like put a woman in a scary place. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, right? And so I don't know, it's just a genre that I like return to a lot and that I find really interesting. And I think also like, you know, so many like famous sort of haunted house, I think heroines is not quite the right word, but a lot of sort of female protagonists of haunted house narratives are sort of these alienated creatures. And as someone who has felt alienated in various ways in her life for all kinds of reasons, like those stories just really speak to me. And so I don't know, it's a genre that I return to both as a reader, as a viewer of film, as a reader of novels, and also as a writer as well.
That's great, thanks. I think, you know, the Gothic also, historically, as opposed to horror, I mean, some of the interesting stuff about the Gothic is the sort of psychological dimension, like the kind of question of, is this giant helmet in the haunted house, like, real, or is it like hallucination? Is it like a projection of one's consciousness? I wonder if that sort of seems like something you're also interested in kind of playing with, like the extent to which is the thing that you're experiencing that's terrifying. Like, I mean, in this case, obviously it's real, but maybe there's some resistance. Is it actually happening?
Well, Emily Dickinson has this great quote where she says, "One not need a mind to be haunted." I'm not going to be able to say the full quote. That would have been very impressive if I could have done that, but I cannot. But she's basically like, yeah, one does not need a mind, or one does not need a house to be haunted. Basically, one needs like corridors of the mind. But she says it in slant rhyme anyway. And it's true. It's like like the way that the mind can be a haunted space, can be its own kind of haunted house, the way that our minds play tricks on us and are our friends and our enemy. And there's something about that I just find so fascinating. And also I find like ghosts interesting. I once had someone say to me really early on in my career, I had a reader come to me and she was like, "I love your work because it's like sometimes you're gay and a ghost appears." But those things aren't related necessarily to each other. It's like you just happen to be gay and also a ghost appears. And I was like, yes, correct. Because sometimes a ghost appears because you're gay, and sometimes you just happen to be gay and a ghost appears, and like whatever. And I think both of those options are excellent. So I feel like it's just a genre that like speaks to me in so many ways, and I have been reading it and studying it and teaching it for so long, and I'm teaching a haunted house class this semester on literature of haunted houses, and it's just like new revelations every single class, you know, even books that I've read a million times before. So
that's awesome and funny and dark, as your writing often is. I was also thinking just about the dream house. Maybe it's like Barbie. I've got Barbie on the brain, but you didn't think you'd get a Barbie plug here. But I was also thinking of that as a governing rubric, and I was also thinking of this book as like weirdly a romance, but like obviously like the very kind of failed and dark kind of romance. It's about a romantic relationship at the center of it, but of course that's not the kind of romance we tend to think of in that genre, which are usually almost exclusively, you know, happily ever after ones. I was wondering, I mean, is Dream House and romance something you were also thinking about this? Did you want to tell a story of a kind of romance that is, you know, one that we don't normally get in literature?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was really interested. It's so weird having written a book about a really terrible thing that happened to you, because one of the hardest parts of writing this book was not, in fact, writing about the worst things that happened, but writing about the good things, like writing about, because like that was, you know, in many ways I'm trying to write about a moment where I had like hope. And I was full of love and like very excited to be alive and very excited to be in my body and in my life and having made the choices I made, and trying to like capture that, but then also the way that sours and rankles and becomes dangerous, and in a way is dangerous because it feels so good, and then it becomes dangerous as a result, because you'll do anything to hold on to that good feeling even when it's like very clearly slipping away for whatever reason. And so yeah, so I think I'm just sort of interested in hope and its frustration, and the way that those things sort of pull against each other.
Thanks for talking about that, and really thanks for writing a book about a subject like this that is, you know, it's so important and probably really hard to talk about. And you know, I think I just want to say, I think it takes a ton of courage to do that. You know, I'm asking these kind of academic and literary questions, but I think it's important to remember that there's a real painful experience at the heart of this book. So thanks so much for doing that. I think a lot of people probably need to see those experiences discussed, but it's a really courageous thing. So thanks. Okay, maybe we can shift gears a little bit to talk about banned books and all. There's really a wave of challenges against books, and your books have been challenged and even removed in some cases from schools and school libraries and curricula. So congratulations, you're doing something right, maybe. What is your sense as an author whose book has been, at the center of some of these controversies or swept up in them, of sort of what's going on in the country right now regarding education and literature, and particularly like certain kinds of literature?
Yeah, I mean, so it's so funny because when I was a kid, because I was super cool, I basically lived in my local public library, and like the librarians all knew me by name. Like I would stay there all day. It was, yeah. And I was every year so jazzed for Bands Book Week. Every year. They had a display. I was like, take me to the display. Checking out, they'd be like, you have a limit to the number of books you could check out. And I'd be like, all right, but I would like wreck their display, like taking all the books, and I had like, I was like always really excited because I was like, what are they trying to stop me from reading? And how can I get to it as quickly as possible? And so, I feel like my relationship with that concept, like I understood that it was bad, and also it always provided me this sense of like, there's like work that certain people don't want you to access, and so isn't it exciting that we have libraries and things that you can like actually like get to access those texts? And when this sort of wave of censorship began, the first moment that I was aware of my own work getting tied up, I mean, a couple of years before, there was an incident where my publisher received a letter from, I think it was the Missouri Department of Corrections, because an inmate had requested my first book, and the prison had denied it. And they have to, apparently when this happens, there's some law, they have to like send a notification to the publisher saying like, this was requested, we denied it. And so we got this letter, and my publisher told me about it, and they were like, this is obviously terrible that this has happened. We're gonna talk to our lawyers, see what we can do, but we don't have anything we can do. And I was like, yeah, it's terrible. And so I was sort of aware of it in that way. And then the sort of the movement, the wave of school bannings that have been happening, during COVID, one morning I woke up and I had a message on Instagram from a reader who was like, hi, like I live in the Leonard School District outside of Austin. There was a school board meeting last night. A woman brought your book and brought a dildo and was furiously brandishing the dildo while reading a section of your book. And there's a video. And I was like, what? And I was like in my pajamas, and I was like, wait, what? And so I find this video, and true to this woman's report, there's this lady who is reading a section of the book that mentions a dildo, and she's like I later Googled, or I went to Amazon and typed in strap-on dildo, and it was the first thing that came up, so I was like, oh, that's how she got it. Like the one that she had was like the first one. I was like, that makes sense. But anyway, so I'm like, listen, I'm watching this woman's video, I'm watching this woman's like speech or whatever, and at first I'm like cracking up because it's so stupid. It's like she's waving it's so ridiculous. And then about 10 minutes into her rant, she starts to talk about like grooming and groomers and how the teachers who have provided this book, and to be clear, the book was actually not being assigned. It was a senior class that had like a memoir course where they had like a bunch of memoirs they could choose from, and they would like pick a memoir from a list of like 20 books or something, and they had to like write a paper about it. So my book was just on a list. It was a queer memoir on a list of a bunch of them. And so this parent, I was talking about grooming and I like sobered up so fast. Like I was like, oh, this is really horrible. And it was crazy how it went from being like just kind of stupid and hilarious to being so awful. And since then, it's been caught up in a bunch of bans in a bunch of different states, and not just that book, but also my first book, and also my graphic novel, The Low Low Woods, as well. And like Greg Abbott like wrote a letter, and my book was one of 2 books that were called out by name, like in the letter that Greg Abbott wrote, basically saying like we need to like be investigating this at all levels in like state schools in Texas. And so it's really, I find it obviously incredibly frustrating because of course, and it's like if you're here in this room, I don't need to tell you why this is bad. I don't need to tell you that like they're obviously focusing on queer books and books by writers of color and trans authors. Like I don't need to explain that to you, but like the fact is we are in this moment where it behooves this certain sort of there's this moral panic around, it's about sex, but it's also about other things as well. This like, what about the children sort of moment that is meant to distract from like other problems that they want to distract us from, right? And so like culture war stuff. Like I remember like when this moment was happening in Texas, it was like very soon after the power grid had failed and all those people had died in that like freeze that they had. And it's like, well, of course, if you don't want people to be talking about this like massive failure of the government to protect its citizens, you would be like, guess what, this book has a dildo in it, right? And you would like really focus on like, and our children are learning about whatever, even if you're misrepresenting it, even if you're cherry picking. And we were just talking earlier about how there was that Washington Post article about how like something like 40% of the banned books in the US right now are being driven by 11 people. Like 11 people have reported enough books to make up 40% of the banned books currently in schools right now. So it's like a very like disingenuous movement. It's a movement that does not come, it's so nakedly disingenuous. It's so horrific, and it also does so much damage. And like, it does damage, I think, in all the ways you would expect. It obviously hurts authors, it hurts culture at large, it hurts kids who would be reading about people who do not resemble them, for whom that is like, that's what you do in school, is you're learning about people that don't look like you and you don't share their experiences. And especially, it hurts queer kids in these often like red states or these like very conservative communities. Like I just kept thinking about the queer kids in that school district in Texas, and like how awful it was that they were being sort of singled out in this way. And it's so devastating, and there's something so just cynical about it, and it just breaks my heart into a million pieces. And and I know, and it's like I know that it's cynical. Like I realize that the reason that this is being done is because our country is just in this moment of like complete crisis right now, and this is just one symptom of the crisis. But I also just cannot emphasize like how terrifying I find it. So.
Yeah, agreed. Amen. And that's a great story, and it is funny, and it's weird, a little weird to think about whether this parent like had that dildo already.
I wish I thought she already had it, but I don't think that's true. But like, I did imagine, I was like, maybe she just has it knocking around, but I don't know, whatever.
Weird thing.
But also, I don't want her to have it because I don't want her to have a good day. I don't want her to, like, I don't.
But what's also really interesting in a serious way about that story is that she did tie it to grooming, because I actually think that that's sort of saying the quiet part out loud, because a lot of times what these parents are saying is that these books are pornographic because they have a single scene of like, queer adolescents fondling each other or touching each other as if adolescents don't do that. But they're saying that this is pornography. But I think what they're really doing is this is a panic about any books that have queer or trans characters in them. It has nothing to do with that book is pornography. And so she sort of said the kind of quiet part out loud, that this is really about, we don't want our kids learning about queer or trans kids.
And if you ask these people what these books were about, they would not be able to tell you. Like if you said, like they can say like on this page, there's the word like penis appears or whatever, but they're never going to be able, if you're like, what is this book about? They would never be able to tell you, because they're not reading, or either not reading it, or they're not reading it in the way that like anybody else would be reading it sort of in good faith, which is terrible.
But I'm really glad that you also, you talked about, I think the reason we want these books in schools, the reason teachers or librarians want, I think growing up queer is hard enough. Growing up in an ethnic minority, a non-white person in a white majority place, and to not be able to see books about yourself, about your own experience or history, is really terrible for kids. They should have this opportunity.
It's a kind of violence.
Yeah.
I think that like, I wrote an op-ed that was in the New York Times about the subject to sort of tie it back to Dreamhouse, because I basically explained that part of the reason I wrote this book is because when I went looking for books, like after this experience, and I was like, I just want to read a book about this subject in the context of like a queer or lesbian relationship or whatever, and there wasn't one. like I looked and I was like, there are lots of memoirs about domestic violence, great ones, but I was really struggling to find a book that kind of looked like this, and I had to write it myself, and writing it almost killed me. It was really hard. And so like, I think this idea that like, if we take away anyone's ability to see themselves, but especially children, it is a kind of violence. And I think talking about it in terms any less serious than that is like doing it a disservice, because it is a kind of violence for someone to come of age. I mean, like, when I was in high school, and I'm like in my late 30s. When I was in high school, I had this friend, I write about this in the memoir, who I sat next to her every day in English class. We would get separated by the teacher because we talked so much. And I adored her, and I wanted to kiss every single freckle on her face, and I wanted to like run away with her, but I didn't know exactly to what end or why. I had such a huge crush on her, and I did not know that's what was happening to me. I did not understand. And I knew I had crushes on boys. Like, I got that, and I didn't get this other part of myself for years and years and years. Like, until I was in college, and I like met other gay people, and I was like, oh wait, now I understand what I am. But it's like weird just to say that out loud. And I think even for like especially younger gen, like the sort of Gen Z right now, where it's like, it seems weird to be like, I wanted to kiss my friend, and I did not know that made me gay. I didn't understand that, but I literally did not, because no one had ever explained it to me. I had never read a book about it. I just had no idea. And had no way of seeing my own experience reflected anywhere. And so the idea that we should be removing books from young people and like not allowing this, it is one of the most violent things I can possibly imagine. And telling them like, there's no value, like you have never existed before. Like for all you know, you're the first, right? And that is like a horrifying thing. And that's what we're doing to this, like to these kids. And it's just, it makes me, sorry, it makes me so mad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I knew it was going to, but I
know,
wanted,
I'm like,
but
ready
we
to
went,
fight someone. I'm like, it's just so aggravating.
but I mean, it's really, I think, poignant for you to talk about this, and I think it's right on the nose as a kind of violence. It's a kind of a tyranny of the minority with this small group of very motivated and very politically sophisticated parents who are launching this, but that it is a kind of violence to deny kids the ability to see that or just read about that experience. Of course, it's also potentially contiguous with actual violence. Yeah. I was speaking to you earlier about the King's English Bookstore in town, which we love and have a very close relationship with. They were having a drag story hour and had a bomb threat last two weekends ago. It seems like that's another piece of this, that these attacks on books play into potential actual attacks and a real rise in hate and violence.
I mean, I think when you consider the current moment in the United States where we have, I think everybody is in a place of like mental precarity. We are not doing well like as a nation, like as a whole. You create scapegoats and victims that center people's rage, an ideological rage especially, and then you make guns extremely easy to access. And it's like, and that is, I mean, it's like honestly, it's so terrifying. And I think it's even terrifying even though like obviously there are like ideologues of this kind all over the place. I think we're in like a very strange, uniquely terrible sort of moment. And yeah, I know it's true, and that's how you end up with things like bomb threats and shootings that target people, like vulnerable people who have been demonized by groups like this.
Yeah, thanks for talking about something that is really just, it is infuriating and it's really scary. We do have time now to take some questions from the audience. I believe we have a couple handheld mics, am I correct about that?
Hello. Okay, so I won't go too deep into it, but I was also in my first lesbian relationship, ended up being really abusive, and I'm a writer, and I was just curious, like how you, because every time I go to write about it, I can write about it, but then the thought of making that public terrifies me, because I'm like, what if she shows up and kills me? Mm-hmm. How do you, how did you do that?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a few sort of levels you have to go through. It's like a sort of I don't know, it's like things you have to ask yourself. So first of all, you have to ask yourself, I think, where you are relative to this experience. I think like whenever you're writing about anything sort of traumatic or intense, you have to like have it, which I know is not the question you asked, but I think that like for me, the first sort of hoop I had to jump through was like figuring out like where am I relative to this information. When you get to the point of like publishing something and having something in public, which is really scary, like it's very vulnerable and strange to have written a nonfiction book about a subject like this where like, you know, not only like anyone can read it and know about this thing that happened. I mean, the logistical question of the specific person, I mean, that is really something that you have to, I mean, it's like sort of, I don't have like exact advice about that particular thing, but I think that like, if you do decide to publish something, like that would be a conversation to have with a publisher. Like that would be, you know, like, you know, when I was touring this book, I had like a lot of systems in place, not just for all actualities, that had to do with just like people who would come to events or, you know, whatever. And I just had to kind of like make a plan. So yeah, I mean, it's, you have to like kind of, you have to in some ways be okay with like a lot of stuff happening that's a little bit outside of your control once you put something out into the world. When you're writing it, you can do kind of whatever you want, but like once it's in the world, like there's a lot of stuff you can't control. And you know, you can use the resources that you have to try to make space to, or make a plan for like things that could happen. But the fact is that having a book out in the world is really terrifying, and it does leave you open to a lot of stuff that you would not expect.
So, since the release of this book, I imagine that people have come forward by you with like their own experiences. How does it feel to like know like how many people you've like managed to help? All these people now being able to like, I guess, understand what's happening with them.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. So it was really weird writing this book because it was really hard to write, sort of emotionally. Touring it was really difficult, and then the middle of the tour, COVID happened. So it was just, and then I was just alone with my thoughts suddenly. And also going through everything, the nightmare that everybody else was also going through at the same time. So it was sort of a weird sort of sequence. And I definitely went through a phase where I was really, this is gonna sound really shocking, I kind of wished I hadn't written it. Just because I had gone through it had been so painful. And I kept asking myself, like, was it worth it? Like, was it worth it what I did to my mental health to make it exist? And yet, sort of a reality, the reason I hesitate to say that is because I also have literally had, I mean, I couldn't even count hundreds, maybe more, thousands of people who have talked to me, sent me messages, left me notes, spoken to me at events, spoken to me in public, like whatever, who have said that it gave them some kind of clarity or helped them through some sort of similar situation. And it is honestly the only thing that has kept me going sort of mentally around this book, where I'm like, well, it's true that it did almost ruin my entire life, but it also helped a lot of people, and that actually means something to me. I'm not trying to be flippant. It's just like, it's a weird tension that I have with this book. And I love it and I'm proud of it, and I think that I did a good job, and also it was so hard. And so, yeah, I think that like, I think it's really the only thing that makes me feel like grateful that it does exist, and grateful that I can't actually go back in time and change it, because I do realize that, yeah, that it's like helped other people. And also I think what's been really amazing is that it helped a lot of people that I also wasn't expecting it to help. Like, I think, you know, the thing about writing a book that's so odd is that, I mean, this book felt so niche to me. Like, I was like, well, like, okay, it feels like there's a lot of queers because I meet them constantly and they're amazing. But there actually are, I mean, you know, it's like whatever, we're like a small, you know, relatively small group of people. However, and then I'm like, and then what percentage of that, people like that have been in you know, how many people is this really gonna be for? And I think the most shocking thing is how quickly I realized that like even people that aren't queer, even people were constantly saying to me like, well, you didn't write this book for me because I'm straight or I'm this or I'm that, but like, it spoke to me for these reasons. And this is a reality of being a writer in general, which is that you have literally no way of knowing who your readers will be. This is actually why you can't write for your readers, because you literally have no way of knowing who they will. I mean, it's impossible, and also you can't know them because there could be millions of them or hundreds of thousands or whatever, and like you're just like, I don't know who they are. Like there's just so many of them, and you can only really write for yourself. But yeah, I think I realized pretty quickly that like there was stuff in here that spoke to a lot of people, even people who didn't, like their lives were not like mine or their experiences were not exactly like mine, but there was something in here that spoke to them about some experience in their life. Like people talking about like being like, oh, I thought about my relationship with my mother, which like the book is not about a mother-daughter relationship, but they were like, there was something in it that like, so I just feel like that was also sort of magical, is realizing that even my own imagination about what my book could be or who my book could reach was like limited, and that like even I did not fully understand like the reach it would have, which is kind of a wild thing. Thank you.
This is going to be a little bit of a vibe shift.
Love that.
I loved your piece on Jennifer's body. Yes, so good.
Yes, yes. I love that hiss of yeses to the audience. That was so good.
And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about like your experience with sort of those themes of like bisexuality, queer baiting, and also like where you see some of these conversations and these themes, I guess, going in like media.
Yeah, so for those of you who haven't read it, there was this really great anthology, which I'm suddenly confusing it. Wait, is it queer? It's not Queer for Fear. It came from the closet, thank you. Sorry, Queer for Fear was a queer documentary about horror, sorry. Yes, it came from the closet, thank you. Which was a book of essays on queer horror films, and I made them give me Jennifer's Body. I said, that's the only one I'll write about, I must do it. And the essay that I wrote is about, obviously, Jennifer's Body, not just as a queer text, but as an essentially bisexual text, which I think is pretty specific. And I at first did not fully realize, like I kind of was like, I watched the movie and then was thinking a lot about like what I wanted to write about, and realized that I had developed a lot of feelings about this concept, this accusation which was leveled at the movie at the time it came out, which is queer baiting, the idea that like there's a lot of like queer content, but like were the actresses queer, or was it really explicitly queer, and like were they just trying to bait queer viewers or into all stuff that I find very tedious and annoying. And so, yeah, I basically write about how the thing about, especially bisexuality specifically, is that, you know, there are so many moments in your life when you actually don't know yourself, and that like you have so many hidden eddies and little caverns and doors and things that you can't possibly know about. And so I mentioned like how when I was a teen, I had like a giant crush on my friend and didn't realize that's what it was. And so, and like there were points in my life before I came out where people would say to me like, are you queer, are you bi, are you, and I would say no, but not because I was closeted or because I was lying, because I actually didn't think I was, right? Because like I had just grown up in this certain environment where like I didn't understand what I was looking at, and so I had no way of giving myself language to identify like what I was. And so basically I'm sort of like, I don't know, sexuality is weird. Like you just don't know. Like you don't know what, and like I think that we've just had this moment where we got so focused on like making like actors say if they're gay or not to play gay characters, and like having this weird sort of language around like who gets to do what and like who gets to say what or claim what labels, and it just makes me really crazy because I'm like literally, go have sex. Like what are you doing? What get off Twitter or X or whatever, just go do something else. And I actually I did an event in Brooklyn for the anthology last fall, and we were talking about queer baiting, and somebody was like, stood up and was like, I heard a conversation the other day about how people were saying that Rocky Horror Picture Show was queer baiting. And I almost like threw the microphone into the audience. Like I was like, I don't even know how to respond to that. I'm not even gonna, I don't know. But like, just being like, yeah, like I feel like we're getting fixated on these like rules in this way that feels really counter to like the vibe of like what we should all be doing. And yeah, I don't know. And that like, yeah, and again, like that bisexuality, there's the way in which like sometimes you are just unknown to yourself, and sexuality shifts and changes, and like you just always don't know who you are or what you want. And like there have been many times in my life when I've written something and I've understood something in the story that I did not understand myself in my conscious mind. It's happened to me many, many times, because sometimes your brain is somewhere else, right? And you can like, there's something that your body knows that your mind doesn't fully have a sense of, or your subconscious understands that your conscious mind does not fully understand. And like, to me, that feels way more interesting than like policing who can do what or write what or like what text. I don't know. I find that conversation like incredibly tedious and annoying. And I just think we should just all be like enjoying the art that we enjoy. Yeah. And also watch Jennifer's Body if you haven't seen it. It's so good.
If we have a quick one, I think we have time for one more question.
Okay.
Oh, okay. This might not be a super quick one, but give it as quick of an answer as you can. But reading that book, I do think I was kind of one of those people that it was not intended to resonate with, but it really did because, like, growing up as a queer person and, like, having parents who are very religious and struggled to accept that, I always felt like I had to prove that my relationships were good and healthy and valid, so that I almost felt like I was on a pedestal of, like, I had to, like, show that queer people are good people and queer relationships are good relationships. And so just, like, my question is, other than the obvious fact that there is a huge void of stuff talking about, like, media talking about queer abuse, what other, like, reasons, or I don't know, do you think there's other reasons why it is hard for people to recognize or discuss queer or lesbian specifically abuse in their lives? Or partner abuse, I should say, specifically.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a bunch of reasons. I mean, I think one of the reasons is simply just that, like, we don't put value in showing, this is sort of like connected to the banned book question of, like, we don't assign, we being like the big sort of group, we culturally, whatever, do not put value in showing people what their experiences mean. And this is especially true for people of color, for women, for trans folks, for queer folks. Like, there's just not a lot of investment in being like, you know, this is what your experience, this is what it means or where it comes from, right? I think that partially, especially with lesbian relationships, and there's like sort of a counter example with like gay relationships, which is like, we also don't have a lot of language for like women committing violence, and sort of alternately, we don't have a lot of language for men being victims of violence. So there's also this like very weird, like I talk about this in the memoir, like a lot of like gendered stuff that like, it's like who can commit violence, what is violence? And also just the fact that like the concept of domestic violence is really new. Like the idea that it's bad to, like, even just you're talking about physical violence, to like hit your wife is literally like 50 years old. Like before the 70s, we didn't even really, we were just like, that's a thing that happens. Like we didn't even like think that is like anything other, even worth pointing out. And so that concept is so new. And then you add to that the way that we kind of keep queer stories sort of submerged in various ways, and you end up with this like recipe for, and then you add the fact that either like men can't be victims or women can't be perpetrators of violence. And then also there's the fact that like abuse is also far more complicated than we give it credit for, or not credit for, but like basically like we think of it as like, I talk about in the book about how like we think about the black eye or like these sort of symbols of physical violence, but that like there's all kinds of violence. There's sexual violence, there's economic violence, there's verbal and psychological violence, and mostly what I'm talking about in this book is not physical violence. Like there's a little, but like mostly it's violence that exists in a way that is, and there's a chapter in here, Dreamhouse's Epiphany, which is just most types of domestic abuse are completely legal, which the fact is it is. Like there's a lot of, no one's gonna send you to jail for like yelling at your partner so much that they are like too tense to talk to you about anything. Like no one's, which is like, and again, like I obviously don't want to like, obviously thinking about like incarceration and the police and law is also its own sort of complicated and thorny issue. But the fact is that even like we just don't have like frameworks for thinking about anything besides like the most obvious sort of kinds of violence. And I think about a lot how like, even with like Me Too, I remember the minute Me Too started, I could see the way the conversation was beginning to shift where people got really focused on like, well, did he do a thing that we can like throw him in jail for, right? Did he like rape somebody or like do like physically hurt somebody? When people are like, no, he did something that's like really shitty and sexist and fucked up or whatever, but like not a thing you could go to jail for. People are like, oh, well, who cares? Or it's like a gray area, or like who, what, and it's like, but it matters, like it does matter, and these things all feed into each other. But I think that people get really fixated. Did I just go out? No, did I? Hello? So they're like, get off the fucking stage, sorry.
Hello? Hello? No? You're giving me thumbs up, but
Am I being like yanked off with a shepherd's crook? Is that what's happening? They're like,
Does this one work?
okay, well,
Okay. We are actually out of time, but before you all, before you all join me in thanking Carmen, I want to thank you all for coming. I see a lot, it's hard to see in the back too, but I see a lot of young people here tonight, and I think that's a real testament. I think it really speaks to the difference your work is making and how much need there is for young people especially to see these kinds of experiences discussed. And I want to thank you again for your courage. I really want to thank all of you for coming. Encourage you to come to more Tanner Humanities Center events. We have David Wallace Wells, climate journalist from the New York Times, coming October 24th. I think it's another issue that's really important to young people. It should be important to all of us. Please come and come to our events and follow us on social media. thc.utah.edu is our website. Carmen is going to sign books. Please buy books from Under the Umbrella. Support them and the King's English. And please join me in thanking Carmen. This has been so great.